We have a lot to talk about when it comes to the Seahawks. Sam, I'll start with their latest outing, which was Sam Darnold's worst of the season, 4 interceptions. He's already facing doubt and question marks heading into a year in which he's been really, really good. But I think that the way my co-host Bump described it is like this just reinvigorated some of the haters. Like it gives them ammo for kind of a week of conversation. What did you make of Sam's day?
Yeah, it was kind of worst case scenario for him. It was like the games that he had at the tail end of last season where he kind of imploded and it threw the whole thing into question. Last season was so confusing because he was really good for almost the entire of the season. And then the 2 biggest games with everything on the line, he melted down. And this was pretty much as close as we've seen to that again. He'd been spectacular at the start of the season, even better than last year. Was ranking as the number 1 quarterback in the NFL by a bunch of different metrics. And then he played the Rams, the kryptonite team, and he looked a lot like the old version of Darnold, where he was making mistakes and really bad mistakes, not just, an occasional forced throw or something a little bit missed, but like almost panicky plays the way that's happened before when he plays the Rams. So I think you kind of have to conclude at this point that the Rams have a unique ability to really throw the chaos into Darnold's mind.
A lot of people are searching for the why. When you look at it, was there anything schematically you saw from the Rams that gave Sam some trouble?
I think the Rams are really unusually built to cause that kind of chaos. I mean, you look at all of his interceptions, all of them featured some kind of pressure. There was a lot of simulated pressure in there as well. So the Rams have this very unusual ability to be able to get pressure with 4 guys up front, but also they will layer in complexities on top of that. They will run stunts up front with those 4 guys. They will use simulated pressures, and it's not necessarily the 4 guys you're looking at that are actually going to come on the pressure. So I think you put all of that together and you have a team that's just very well built to cause the kind of chaos that Darnold doesn't like, and I think Darnold's not the type of quarterback that really struggles if you just put him under pressure. Pressure is not necessarily the thing that causes Darnold to turn back into a pumpkin. It's all of that stuff put together. It's quick pressure that he's not entirely sure where it's coming from, and he hasn't necessarily been preparing for it, and he's got to figure out where to go with the ball instantly off the back of that. That's when I think you start to see this panicky decision-making with Darnold that's still apparently there.
Do you think that quarterbacks can change that?
I don't know if they can completely eradicate it. I think you can definitely, a lot of these things with pressure and with that type of thing, it's how much of it is there, because it doesn't always scale. Like, you're not necessarily going to react the same way if you only get pressured a couple times a game versus if you're pressured almost the entire game constantly. It can change the way you behave under pressure. So I think we've seen from Darnold, no one play is necessarily going to cause him to just turn back into a pumpkin and panic and make a terrible mistake. But if you come up against a team that is good enough to be able to do that on a fairly consistent basis, that's when he has problems. And it wasn't just the Rams last season. The Lions were able to do it to him as well. There aren't that many of those teams in the NFL. It's just unfortunate that one of them sits in the same division as Seattle.
Well, the silver lining with all this is that even with 4 interceptions, you still had a chance to win this ball game, right? The Rams only won by 2. With 4 interceptions, I was thinking back to that Jared Goff performance. Was it last year or year before where he had tossed 4 interceptions, I think, against the Houston Texans, and they came back and won that game. Obviously, the Seahawks didn't win this one. But what does that say about this ball club?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is that was kind of my takeaway from the game as well. Look, the bad news is Darnold, had the kind of meltdown game again, and maybe the Rams are just able to do that to him every time they play. But even with that, they maybe could have won this, or maybe should have won this game, certainly could have won this game, because the Seattle defense was outstanding, because JSN is still fantastic, because, all the other elements of the team were in good shape despite the Darnold meltdown. So I think overall that is definitely a good sign. I do think that this team is a for real contender. The problem is, you're definitely going to have to play the Rams again. You might have to play them twice if both teams make the playoffs. And, that is a team that does appear to have the kryptonite for Darnold that they're going to have to figure out a way around. But I think overall, it was still a good sign for this team that despite a complete meltdown from their quarterback, they were still in really good position to win the game.
Yeah, I was thinking, I entered this game thinking, well, I think Seattle's defense is, a hair better than the Rams' defense, and I think that the Rams don't have the quarterback questions that Seattle does. Both offenses are explosive. Both offenses are better with the pass. Like you were looking at a lot of similarities, and I left the game thinking kind of the same, right? Like I left the game thinking Seattle's defense looked great and made the day pretty tough for Stafford still. So I don't know that I changed my opinion about what the gap is or where it is. To you, when you look at the Rams and Seattle, kind of compare and contrast, how big is the gap between the two?
I think it's razor thin. I mean, we saw that based off just how the game ended, by how close it was. The Rams may have that kryptonite ability for Darnold, but even with that, the Seahawks are able to play the game close. And, I expect that even if the same thing happens next time, it will still be a close game. Like if Darnold turns the ball over one less time, maybe they win that game. Or even if at the end, if he just gets a little bit closer on that final drive and they make the kick, they win the game. So, yeah, I think it's a razor-thin margin. Maybe Seattle is the better team in a few different areas, but that schematic advantage, that defense, their ability, the Rams' ability to get the worst out of Sam Darnold might be the equalizer. But I think both of these teams are playoff teams. I think they're both legitimate Super Bowl contenders.
Mike McDonald said during his presser that Ken Walker has earned himself some reps. And I'm happy to hear that. I understand what they were doing, going back and forth with Zach Charbonnet. He's a downhill runner, better in pass pro. But I think for this offense to kind of take another step forward, you have to be explosive in the run game. How would you handle the K9 and Zach Charbonnet situation?
Yeah, I think Kenneth Walker is definitely more dynamic, more explosive, and for a team that doesn't always run the ball particularly well, I think that's useful, having a running back that can make his own yards sometimes. I think it's a useful combination. It is a sort of thunder and lightning combo, and having a split backfield, having a committee, kind of the way the league has gone now anyway. So, yeah, I think it's good to get Kenneth Walker, I think, should be getting the most touches out of that backfield. But I think it's definitely good to be able to use them both and alternate and go back and forth between the two and, use matchups where appropriate, where you think maybe this week Charbonnet has a better impact against this type of defense, or, maybe another week is a Kenneth Walker heavy game. But I think using both of them is a good thing.
What do you trust and believe in most with Seattle, and what do you trust in least?
I think that defense is exceptional right now. The defensive front, the year two of this scheme, and the back end is playing spectacularly well as well with, the cornerbacks that they've got, plus the addition of a guy like Imanwari as that kind of Kyle Hamilton, joker, safety, defensive big nickel threat. I think that defense is going to be a problem for basically everybody it comes up against. I don't really have, I guess the thing that you worry the most about is that run game, and they've been a little bit less efficient, less effective running the ball. I think that's where the offensive line, which is a work in progress, is definitely improved, is much better than it was a year ago. I think that's the area where it's still exposed the most, is they're not a dominant run team. And that's part of why I think they've sort of gone back and forth between those running backs and haven't necessarily been able to run the ball at will against anybody. That's the area that I think is probably most vulnerable when you get up against the best teams in the NFL that can stop the run.
The near loss of Gray Zabel was scary, right? You look at this offensive line completely different. You're already dealing with Sundell going down. But what have you made of Gray Zabel and just the steps forward this offensive line has made this year?
Yeah, I think Gray Zabel is a fantastic player. I loved him as a prospect coming out. He was the best player at the Senior Bowl for the entire week when he was down there, despite playing multiple different positions and sort of flipping between positions, rep to rep, let alone sort of drill to drill. I think he's going to end up being a really the high end player for them and a real impact guy. And certainly in pass protection, I think he's already been a big upgrade for them. Run blocking, it's a little more hit or miss. But, yeah, I think he's a huge loss if they don't have him. I think he has made a big impact on the offensive line already.